Hey guys, I hope your holidays are going great so far. Today we're going to be talking about millennials and baby boomers and their finances and kind of comparing the two and really figure out what's going on with the economy. Because unless you've been living under a rock for the past several years, you've seen articles all the way from millennials are too frivolous, wasting all their money on iPhones and avocados and Starbucks, to new reports saying they're actually being too stingy and it's starting to stagnate the economy because millennials aren't spending money. But why is that? Why does it seem that millennials are having a hard time really taking off and getting their own homes and really figuring out what they want to do financially in life? Well, this comes down to a couple things. So let's get into what are some of the biggest expenses that people have. That's housing, healthcare, and education. So let's start with education. So with education, back in the 1970s when baby boomers were starting to go to school, they were paying about $3,700 for 4 years of college. That covers their tuition, fees, and then the housing would be separate. We're going to talk about that later. So let's adjust that for inflation so that we can compare apples to apples. So back in 2006, when people my age, millennials, were starting to go to school, that same $3,700 would look really a lot more like $13,000. So compare that $13,000 to the $32,000 that it cost in 2006 to go to college. And it's only gotten more expensive since then. So from 1970s to 2006, it's actually 2.5 times more expensive after adjusting for inflation just to go to college for those 4 years. Now, to make matters worse, interest rates for these loans can actually be pretty high. On an extremely low end, they can get down to like 3%, 4%. But on the high end, they can actually get up to over 12%. And the average for graduate students is actually over 7%. So these can actually be almost as like a credit card loan. It's actually pretty terrible. It's so bad, in fact, that some people are paying every month on their loans and not even covering enough to pay the interest, which means those loans are actually growing. I know several people who this is happening to. Now, millennials are some of the most educated of any generation. And unfortunately, we're actually making 20% less on average than our parents' generation. So even though we're more educated, we're not seeing that bump in pay that education should actually bring. So this brings us now, we're going to talk a little bit about overall wealth. So right now, baby boomers own 57% of the wealth of the entire country. And millennials own 3%. Well, of course, they're younger and they haven't had time to build up wealth yet. But by the same age that millennials are now, baby boomers had already amassed 20% of the nation's wealth. So even by that, we're still way behind by a factor of 7. So let's talk now about a big generator of wealth, which is home ownership. So millennials are having a really hard time buying homes because the costs have gone up astronomically. So if you look at a home in the 1970s when baby boomers were starting to buy homes, it cost about $17,000 for the average home. And that sounds ridiculous because we have to adjust for inflation. So the average home adjusted for today's money was about $110,000, which sounds fairly reasonable. But when you look at today's actual average home cost, it's over $227,000. So it's more than doubled. So millennials are having to postpone buying homes because they're making 20% less, they don't own a lot of wealth, they can't afford these homes, and so they're having to also postpone having children. So now I want to circle back to something I alluded to earlier, which is that 40% of young adults are actually living at home. That's a 75-year high. This hasn't happened since the fallout of the Great Depression. So what are we going to do about this massive problem? Well, the student loan debt problem has ballooned to over $1.6 trillion. So how are we going to take care of this? Well, one proposal on the table right now is a student loan bailout, where the government pays either part or all of the student loan and just forgives it. So a lot of people have a lot of questions on this. First of all, what would happen to the schools? What would happen to the government? What would some of the ramifications be of a $1.6 trillion student loan bailout? Well, it wouldn't affect the schools because the schools have already been paid. Banks and the government, they own those student loans, so there's nothing to do with them really. But that actually still leaves the problem in place. The schools are still too expensive. My undergraduate has increased its price by 25% since I've left college. That's not that many years ago. So another idea on the table that Andrew Yang has proposed is that you would actually not allow schools to get these federal loans to their students unless they decrease the bloat and overhead of the school so that they could get the prices down. Because we have to get the prices down, otherwise people are not going to be able to afford college. One of the other ideas on the table that Bernie Sanders has proposed is free state universities and colleges. And this sounds radical, but only sounds radical in America because every other major country already has this. We're kind of the last holdouts on universal health care, the last holdouts on having free state colleges and universities. There's a lot of things that we need to do to really fix these problems. Because one of the reasons that millennials aren't being able to spend in the economy and why things are starting to stagnate is because millennials don't have any money to spend. So the idea that the government's going to go broke by bailing out the $1.6 trillion, no, they're going to make that money back in tax revenue by allowing millennials to actually just spend that money into the economy, actually get things churning again. So when there was a housing crash, they bailed out the banks. And anytime there's ever been a problem in the economy, they've always bailed out the banks. This time, let's bail out the people and actually forgive that student loan debt, or at least a massive portion of it, so that people can get out from under it, start spending that money in the economy, and get things moving again. If you guys like this video, please give it a like. More than just giving me some motivation, it actually helps the YouTube algorithm push it out to more people so that more people can see it and really get the numbers and the facts on these huge problems. So if you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to keep pushing out content like this. And go ahead and send the video to someone you think could get some good information from the data that we talked about today. All right, guys, I hope to see you in the next one.